Hey guys, welcome to the Awaken Nights and Chill podcast, brought to you by the Awaken Nights Podcast Network. We are in for an incredible podcast today. As always, you're joined by your host, Caleb Hansey from Awaken Church Wollongong. And we have got another Awaken Church alum today, all the way. I think this is the first interstate Awaken Nights and Chill guest. I think we've all been from the Wollongong area as guests, and this is the first time we're jumping to some call it the mightiest state of all. I don't know if we're going to go that far, but it's I guess joining us all the way from the ACT, the Canberra, the motherland, Awaken Church, Canberra South. We've got Christopher Wielen joining us. Say hey, Chris. How you doing?
Hey, bro. Thank you so much for having me. This is a real treat. First Awaken Canberra representative. I feel honoured.
It's good to have you, man. We're loving, first of all, for those that don't know about Awaken Church, maybe listening from other places, we do have one church by two locations at the moment. More to come, more to grow. And so I think one of the benefits of that is getting to connect with heaps of different people from two different states. And we obviously knew each other before this, but it's been nice to get to know each other more. And we have this connection. So I think this podcast is going to be a lot of fun. And we'll get to the movie in a second if you missed it on Saturday night. But do you want to maybe just intro yourself? Let the people know who you are. What do you do? What's your favorite color? You don't have to do that. Just whatever you want to say. Go for it.
Yeah, I am 26, married, no kids, living the dream, living that double income, no kids dream that obviously have recently lost with Dalton entering the family.
True.
But yeah, I am here on staff at Awaken Church Canberra as youth pastor and head up our welcome team and worship staff with my wife. And then the rest of my time, I work as a professional musician, which is a huge blessing. So teach music, perform music, obviously not at the moment with the COVID-19 craziness. Yeah. But that's about me. Favorite color? It's got to be blue. Blue is for
blue.
Boy. Yeah.
Blue for boy. Boy blue. Boys can love pink too. We're not sexist on the podcast.
I love me a pink shirt. For sure.
A nice salmon pink look on Sunday. Sunday salmon pink button up even would be nice.
Let me eat salmon as well.
Yeah. Okay, true. Quick shout out too. You said you're a professional musician. Make sure if you're listening, support your professional musos or creative people in this season. They need your support. They need your love. They need your messages. Crazy time. We know you're going to come out on the other side greater and stronger. So we're praying for you guys, you and your wife, Becca, incredible. And we know you're going to come out of this even greater. So, well, let's get straight into it. The movie we are reviewing today, we watched it on Saturday night. It was one of those really polarizing films. I'd say the first polarizing movie we've done on the podcast. When I put it up to say, hey, we're going to do this film, I've had the most responses I've ever had, but I had a lot of positive responses and a lot of negative responses. And it's one of those movies we may get to in the end of the podcast to talk about people's thoughts on it, but we are reviewing The Goonies, the 1980s classic, cult classic movie, The Goonies. And I don't want to put you too much under the bus early in the podcast, but this was your first viewing of the movie. Is that correct?
I have never seen The Goonies before in my life. So it was an experience and a half, let me tell you that.
Wow. I first watched The Goonies at a 13th birthday party sleepover. It is your typical 13-year-old birthday boy movie as you gather together with the twisties and the Maltesers and the sleeping bags, and you can't even tell me that there's any better night than what that night was. And so we were, I haven't watched it much since then, so I went and watched it again, and I'm excited to review it. So we're going to get into our three segments in a moment, as always, which are a box of favorites. So favorite character, favorite scene. We are going to get into a whole lot of problems. We're going to be talking about the problems that were in the movie, some issues that maybe we had with it. And then we're going to finish the podcast by talking about the sequel has landed. So me and Chris are both directors. We're going to pitch a plot for a potential movie. And hopefully Steven Spielberg, who came out with the story for this movie, is going to jump on this podcast. Shout out, Steven. Come on the pod. We don't need Spielberg. We're on a first-name basis with Steven. And we're going to make a movie. But before we do that, as always, we love fast facts. We want to know about the movie. We want to know what happened, where it went, where it's going. And let's jump into our fast facts. The Goonies was released in 1985. Classic year. Great movie year. We'll get into that in a second. It was directed by Richard Donner, who, for those that don't know, did the Lethal Weapon movies, did the Superman movies, the first couple, directed the incredible Christmas movie Scrooge with Bill Murray. Incredible film. Incredible. Apparently, he's on board. He just turned 90, I believe. We watched a reunion, both of us, and I believe he was on it. He's old. He's down to be the executive producer or director of Lethal Weapon 5, which apparently is in the works at the moment. So,
Really? Man,
Richard,
I hope I'm directing movies when I'm 90.
I hope, I hope I can. Yeah, I don't know what he's doing at 90, but he's looking good. His wife's 70, so he's doing something right. The movie, directed by Richard Donner, starring Sean Astin, Josh Brolin, Jeff Cohen, Corey Feldman, Kerry Green, just to name a bunch of different people in the movie. It was a start. Like, looking back on it now, and maybe we'll get into this, maybe back then it wasn't as star-studded as what we think it was, or had such an iconic cast because many of them were kids. But looking back on it in 2020, it's a pretty crazy cast that we seem to have. So, yeah, incredible. The cost of the movie to make was 19 million, which I think was at the time quite steep. It seemed.
Yeah, it's a decent chunk of cash in 1985, right?
But quite a high cost production potentially with the set and the pirate ships and the stuff we see and all that. The booty traps or the booby traps. The box office was 124 million, so it obviously made a decent coin, a bunch of money. I do just want to quickly say before we get into the really quick plot, maybe the reason that this movie didn't do as well at the box office is what some others did. I mean, it did well. It came out the same year, just to name a few, as Breakfast Club, Back to the Future, the original, and Rocky IV. So, like, not saying they all came out at the same time, but like Rocky IV for many is the favorite Rocky. Ivan Drago, classic. America versus Soviet Union, blah, blah, blah. Back to the Future, the original, like, you can't get much more classic than Michael J. Fox in that particular time. And The Breakfast Club is obviously that upper echelon tier of adult kind of 80s movies, which, shout out, The Breakfast Club only cost $1 million to make and made something along the lines of $300-400 million. So, has
there been an Awakened Nights pod about The Breakfast Club? Because
yeah, we should get there. I think
if that hasn't happened, it definitely will happen.
Yeah, I think we should. But we're not there today. We're talking about the Goonies. Really quick plot before we get into box of favorites. I like to give it really succinct, really brief. It says this: a group of young misfits called the Goonies discover an ancient map and set out on an adventure to find a legendary pirate's treasure. That's all you need to know. That's all you need to care about. And I think that holds up in the 80s as much as it does today with my tiny childish brain as I watched the movie on Saturday night. And I rewatched it yesterday just to get my head fresh. So we're going to get straight into it. Box of favorites. Chris, I'm going to go over to you. What was your favorite character in the movie? What was your favorite scene? It's tough, but you got to do it.
It's tough. It's tough. I mean, for me, I'm going to list like a couple of second places. I thought Sloth, really amazing. Chunks, just great, excellent. But my top pick, box of favorite character, has got to be my boy Data. He's just like, in terms of comedic gold in this film, watching in 2020 for the first time, he's the character that I just lost it at repeatedly. And for me, jokes like booby traps in this pirate maze being booby traps, I'd never heard that before. I'm sure if you heard it in 1985, you're rolling your eyes at me now being like, it's not funny. But for me, I lost it. I was like, this is iconic. I can see why this is a cult classic. So for me, he's my man. And some of the scenes, in terms of like a favorite scene in my box of favorites, the scenes where he is using his various gadgets to varying degrees of success, I feel like I would have been that kid if I was going to be any of them.
True.
I am not Asian, but if I was, I would have been that kid.
I agree. I think you may have been can I just say, I love a good movie with sneakers, with shoes. I'm a shoe head. You're a bit of a shoe head. We agree on that. This movie had a lot of good nods to Nike shoes, and obviously Data being one of them with I think it was called the slick shoe, where his shoes come up and they shoot at oil. Brilliant marketing ploy in this film to slide that in, because it wasn't just one of those things where, I mean, Back to the Future is similar with the Air Mags now, where he puts them on in the future, and that's iconic, and that's a little bit overstated to me, like in that movie, whereas this movie was a bit more understated in the sense of it served a function for the plot to develop, but it also was like, wow, those shoes are cool. I want some shoes that shoot out oil. So yeah, I agree. Data, interesting. He's not on my honorable mentions or my favorite character, so I'm glad that you went with that.
Talk to me,
So,
man. Talk to me. What were yours? What were
I'm
yours?
going to give some honorable mentions. The first one is to 80s fashion and particularly leg warmers. There's a scene at the start of the movie where they go past the high school and this chick is like, I don't know if we just like, you know how fashion comes back in and we're now wearing like 90s clothes again and like bright jackets and baggy jeans and all that stuff. I don't think leg warmers are ever going to come back in. And they look as ludicrous in that scene as I hope they did in the 80s, where some chick is wearing like her hair in like tied up little ponytails, baggy tracksuit, and then like this big, like, looks like socks that your grandparents wear now because they're diabetics all the way up to her kneecaps. And just want to shout out leg warmers. Um, yeah. Anyway, character-wise, he's not my favorite, but I did love him in the film, and I think I mentioned to you, Corey Feldman as Mouth. I actually just love Corey Feldman as an actor. I loved him in Stand By Me. Corey Feldman in Stand By Me was brilliant. In another 80s film, and he just had his time at that point of being an incredible child actor, kind of that the grungy teenage particular character. So I thought he was great in the film. His lines were great. His comedic relief was great. His redemption kind of story at the end, even with I don't even, I think is it Steph, the blonde chick's name in the movie, the old, yeah, where they kind of had a thing towards the end of the movie. I enjoyed. But interestingly, my favorite character in the movie, and it's not like a whole Avengers Josh Brolin thing, but was Brand. I actually really, and it wasn't a character I liked back when I watched it in like 2007 for the first time when I was 13. On this previous watch, Brand was by far my favorite character in the movie. The reason being, I think it would be so easy in the 80s at the time of the movies to write an older brother character as like this douche, like you just hate your young siblings. And he wouldn't even have been on the journey with the young kids because he was like the douche trying to chase them the whole time. But they wrote it in such a way that he was like this protective brother of his little brother who loved him and cared about him and his mum and his dad. Although he came across as like, I'm better than you type thing at the start of the movie, they could have stuck with that for the whole film. But by the end of it, you see him being like, I actually love my family. I'm here for my brother. And I thought that was interesting for an 80s movie because normally they portray that whole muscle jack guy with that would be what his story arc would be. Like you go to Back to the Future and you look at, whatever the guy's name is in that movie. I always forget his name. The guy that Michael J. Fox is going up against the entire film, of all three. If you go to him, he's like this big broody character and that doesn't change. Whereas I think Brand in this film had a great character development, and I think Josh Brolin did so well at portraying an attractive guy that was supposed to be the guy that was like the heartthrob, but also like this kind of like I'm protecting I'm the older brother. So yeah. Anyway, favorite scene. I interestingly, it's weird that I like this scene, but when they first start talking about the houses getting foreclosed, and you see them in their house when they're first finding the map and stuff at the very beginning of the movie. There's a scene when Bran walks up to Mikey and he hugs him and he's like, it's going to be okay, blah, blah, blah. And you see this kind of brother relationship, which I think carries the movie. Yeah, real one tear, one cry, one like equals one tear. There was so many 80s classics in that moment. There was that Cyndi Lauper clip on TV, which like she wrote like she wrote this song for the movie, which is ludicrous.
Have you watched the video clip for that Cyndi Lauper? That's absurd. If you haven't, go on YouTube and watch it's like part movie, part music video.
It's weird.
And it's 80s, and you need to go watch it.
It's weird. They had the line that says, if you don't hurry up, your clothes are going to go out of style, which is like the most 80s line I've ever heard in my life. But we still say it, like parents still say it today. And then there was them having a bag of marbles that was even in the film, which provided, actually, I didn't realize till at the end of it, had the big plot line of that being the savior to them getting their house back. But they're on the floor playing with their marbles, which I just think is like, if you try to explain to a 5-year-old today in 2020, hey, here's a bag of marbles, like, what are they doing with it? Do they even understand what that is if they watch that today? Like, if you play this to your youth kids, do they know what a bag of marbles is? Because I don't think they do.
I don't think I would know what to do with a bag of marbles.
So anyway, that was my favorite scene. I just think it showed the time era of the film so beautifully, and I think what was at the heart of the movie, which was a bunch of friends scheming, coming up with something, and then their older brother, that relationship of family. I think it all showed that together, which for me did something to me when I rewatched it. So we're gonna move on to a whole lot of problems. I think in a movie like this, in this type of movie, it's pretty easy to pick apart some things that there's issues with because it's such an old movie. 1985. Some of the lines are ludicrous. Some of the storyline is crazy, and I think it's easy to pull that apart a little bit. And so I don't want to go too deep with it because I know that if we start nitpicking it super hardcore, we're gonna get some haters come back and be like, you don't appreciate it. It's an 80s movie. We leave it in the 80s. There's some things that are weird with it, but I had some actual plot hole issues that I had with the movie that I just want to throw out, and then you can kind of shout out yours afterwards. The opening scene when they left the prison, he shot the gasoline with a gun, which I don't know if that was his original plan, but it seems dangerous, really dangerous. Anyway, I had some issues with that. When they're walking through the tunnel to get to the pirate ship, when they get to the water pipes, and I know it's comedic relief, and I know that it's like that weird, club where they're trying to show the rich people in the town compared to the poor people, and they're at that country club, but surely banging on the water pipes to get people's attention doesn't seem like the most, and I know they're kids, but doesn't seem like the most logical answer to get people's attention. Like, they're going to burst. Like, let's use some brain. I don't understand that. The Data saving the gun, saving the day at the end of the movie where he comes out and he has the little thing that grabs the guy's testicles or whatever it is. When he gets pulled towards her and the older lady of the Fratelli brothers' mum, when she loses her gun, it's like one of those television commercials where people are trying to show like bowls that don't spill, and she's like, "Oh my God!" and it kind of like gets thrown up, and it's so fake, it's unbelievable. Like, there's no way your gun would fall out of your hand like that in that particular motion. And so if you haven't watched it in a while, go back and watch that particular scene. And my last one, actually two more. One more is, I don't know. I actually love Data as much as you did. I thought he was awesome. I don't know how well his Asian stereotypes have aged in 2020. Like, I genuinely watched it and went, like, some of this stuff is like, and like, look, I actually thought when I went and watched it that his accent in it, I didn't know that was actually how he spoke. And so obviously we went and watched the reunion and he does speak like that. So I will take some of that back because I thought he was putting on some of that accent to make the stereotype be more like what it was supposed to be. Because in the 80s, having an Asian kid in a movie was like, it was a stereotype, I think. So, and the biggest one was, apparently there's a scene cut out from the movie where in the pirate ship, they were supposed to come up against a big giant octopus that was been there for years, which they cut out. But at the very end of the movie, I think it's Chunks or someone, it's Data. Data yells out when they're interviewing them on TV. He yells out, "But nothing was as scary as the octopus," and that's still in the film. So I just don't understand. Like, surely they could have reshot that scene to not include the line one, but maybe it was like a last editing decision or something. But if you rewatch the movie, that line makes 0 sense because the octopus isn't in the movie. So yeah, that's my plot holes. Anything from you?
Man, like, I watched this movie having never seen it with no nostalgia. And so I felt like the plot holes were like just very glaringly obvious. And I knew that we were filming a podcast and that a section of it was going to be focused around plot holes.
Yeah.
But I kind of watched this movie being like, oh my gosh, like, there's just so many moments that don't make sense or feature cohesive narrative from a modern movie viewer's perspective. But the thing that really got me afterwards was like, this movie is very much like how you would play make-believe imaginative stories running around your neighborhood as a gang of kids, where like your storylines or the things that you imagine or the way that you would play as a 6-7-year-old kid just would make no sense ever. Like, so like I was kind of like watching it being like, oh, like this feels tonally and plot-wise a lot like some of the make-believe things that you would do when you were that age. Yeah. And so even though in the movie it's portrayed as really happening, it kind of evokes that sense of, oh, like I could imagine playing like this. I could imagine pretending that all of this happened, even though it's portrayed in the movie as real. So I kind of probably let a lot of plot holes, like the ones that you're lining up, I kind of would let them slide almost out of like, oh, maybe that was intentional. Looking back, I probably don't think it was intentional, but I almost wrote them off as being like, oh, maybe that's the filmmakers being intentional about it having this fantastical, almost silly logic sense to it. But the biggest thing that stuck out to me as like an issue, and I think like, I mean, it's riddled with stereotypes, and you're just not allowed to make a movie in 2020 that is this riddled with stereotypes. And so watching it with a modern lens, you're like, oh my gosh, like that would just not fly in this day and age. Like you would be like absolutely slammed for a lot of this. But I guess leaving all of that stuff in 1985, one of the biggest things that stuck out to me was just how rapidly the emotions of characters skyrocketed and then plummeted. Like there are scenes in this movie where Steph is just like pretty normal. And then for like 30 seconds, she just turns into this like screaming mad cannon of a young lady that just pops off and then all of a sudden goes back to normal. And I feel like filmmakers these days are more nuanced with their, like the writing of characters and their emotions. Like you just don't see that jump the way that happens. So
especially with teenage women, it's almost like what they were trying to do was be like, oh, teenage women are so emotionally unstable that they're just going to go off the Richter. And I think that's almost like what they were trying to show, which you just wouldn't get away with it now. That wouldn't really fly. Yeah, and even the Fratelli brothers, like they have to sing in Italian every 3.5 seconds just because their name was Fratelli. Like that's so stereotypical too. So
oh my gosh, as kids, we went to this Italian restaurant in Victoria called Fratelli's, and so as soon as they got introduced, I was like, oh my gosh, like we would go to Fratelli's for Italian food like once a week after church with like visiting pastors or whatever. So I watched this like imagining that these were the people cooking 10-year-old me meat lovers pizza on a Sunday afternoon. It was the greatest.
And they had a guy that they'd killed in the back closet, and they had a sloth brother in the basement of their restaurant. Like, I'm not going to get into plot holes because we can't, it's too deep, but like, let's just turn up to a random abandoned house where the guys ran away, happened to be hiding. Like this, out of all the places in Oregon where they were, that's just where they happened to be. So anyway, but it's true. I think that they did it in such a way where it was like, this is, I think I was on that reunion we watched. Was it Chris? Who's the writer? The guy that wrote Home Alone. Chris isn't Christopher Columbus the Explorer?
It is Chris Columbus. Yeah. So
he wrote Home Alone. He wrote a bunch of these classic movies. And I think he's mentioned in saying this was like what I dreamt would be like a mission with my friends to go on and do. So
yeah,
you got to take that with a grain of salt and kind of go, okay, that makes sense. So did you have any more plot things you want to talk about before we move on?
Nah, man. Nah, good.
Cool. We'll get into the sequel has landed. I'm going to throw it over to you first. So you're the director. You've been given the directorial role. Yep. What story are you running with? What are you pitching to Steven Spielberg?
This is a radical left turn tonally from the original Goonies, because they've been planning a sequel and talking about a sequel for part of 35 years. True. So this is a wild detour. I envision like watching Chunk and Sloth's relationship kind of develop from joint prisoners, and Chunk is extremely scared of Sloth, and then they become friends and team up and save the day.
Yeah.
I'm envisioning almost like a transformation docuseries on Netflix that's like part Queer Eye for the straight guy, part Backyard Blitz. That really is just like a Sloth transformation movie where you get the like, this is before, this is how Sloth was, and this is who he is afterwards. And he goes from being Sloth to having like all the work done, new set of clothes, and he looks like Brad Pitt. That'd be what I'd be pitching. And similarly, Chunk, if you look at Chunk, the actor that played Chunk now, like we watched the reunion special that just went up on YouTube.
Massive transformation.
Chunk looks night and day. Like you look at Chunk as a kid and you're like, how does this now adult man, what's the actor's name? Jeff Cohen. How does Jeff Cohen look like this? And he portrayed Chunk. So,
and he's not even an actor anymore.
It's crazy. He's like an entertainment lawyer. He did Goonies and was like, great, now I'm going to go make some real money.
Yeah, crazy. I like that idea. What would you call it? Would you call it Goon Eye for the Sloth guy?
Yeah, something like that. Like that.
I can run with that. I can pitch that.
Cool.
I'm shocked. This is the first time it's ever happened on the podcast. I'm pitching a very similar idea. It's net. We didn't talk about this. I want to clarify. We didn't. We have not communicated. We don't. We don't reference each other's segments. Out of all, look, there's a lot of storylines you could pitch a sequel for in this movie. Like a lot of you could go with the whole Brand and I don't even remember his girlfriend's name. What's the girl's name in the movie?
Andy. Brand and Andy.
You could go a Brand and Andy, kind of like a Family Ties TV show down there with their
Call
kids.
it Brandy. I mean, it's too perfect.
Yeah, you could call it Brandy. Like you could go with Data, and you could go with him. You could do a remake of Shanghai Noon with him in it and someone else. I don't know. There's a lot you could do. That's okay. We'll cut that bit out.
We'll adjust that in the edit.
But I'm actually, look, out of all of it, I watched that last scene, especially when Chunks turns to Sloth and says, "You're going to move in with me now." Blah blah blah. So I've never pitched it's always been a movie, and I'm kind of zagging a bit here, but like you are, I'm pitching a TV series. It's a sitcom.
Yep.
And it's called just called Chunks and Sloth. It's a Seinfeld meets Friends meets How I Met Your Mother, and it's Chunks and Sloth get their own apartment, and it's just their antics. It's just what they get up to. It's it's 20-minute episodes. It's a Netflix special. They do an offshoot of it. It's called Sloth King. It comes out in isolation. I'm down for it. And,
there you go.
And I think, look, R.I.P. Sloth the actor has passed away. He's not with us anymore. So
but the lucky thing is, a lot of it was prosthetic. So
True.
You can get anyone to play him.
You could play.
Awesome.
You could play.
I've actually been working. I've been fattening out my face
just
in quarantine to make it happen.
I'll shave my beard and I'll play Jeff Cohen. I'll play Chunks. You can play Sloth, and we'll make this thing happen.
There you go.
Yeah, so there we go. That was the sequel. Look, Steven Spielberg, if you're listening, there's 2 brilliant TV shows we've just pitched there. We could start off with mine, and then we could get to your one as Chunks has the transformation. So just to see what happens. So I'm all for it. But as we like to do at this part of the podcast, we go to the ratings because as movies always are, some of them are really well rated. Some of them not so much, and they're movies that people love, even though the ratings don't say so. Like my all-time favorite movie, Christmas with the Cranks, which has a rating of, I believe, 8% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is so undervalued, so underappreciated, and Christmas with the Cranks should get more love. 8% on Rotten Tomatoes, do your job, people. That's ludicrous. But this movie, we always go to IMDb, we always go to Rotten Tomatoes, and we get the 2 ratings, and we say, hey, look, is it underrated? Is it overrated? Is it just rated? Is it fair? So this movie, after all these years, 7.8 on IMDb and 75% on Rotten Tomatoes. So we're kind of kicking around that 75% mark as a rating. So over to you first. Are you saying overrated, underrated, or just rated? It's where it needs to be. That's fair.
For me, having no nostalgia for it and having only just watched it, I feel like 75 is bang on the money from my perspective. Like, if you think about Rocky IV, if you think about Back to the Future, it's not hitting that high 9 point for me. So I feel like now 75. But if I'd seen it at a 13-year-old birthday party, I might be tempted to rate it higher if I had rewatched it now and suddenly all of the lines hit with that nostalgia. Like, I'm very much just biased based on past experience. So I think for me, bang on, wouldn't want to rate it higher because it's just not quite in that higher area. In terms of 80s films, like in terms of indie, in terms of Star Wars, in terms of Rocky, Back to the Future, it's not there for me, but it's still like a really good fun time, and it's pretty clear how influential it has been on modern pop culture and 80s stuff.
Yeah. I'm actually going to agree. I mean, I know I said I watched it in when I was 13, and so I enjoyed it back then for different aspects than what I enjoy it now for. But I think that you're right. I think that it's kind of like, that's where it sits. I think 75%, it's a good movie. It's not a great movie. Would I watch it again if a bunch of people got over and said, hey, let's pull out the Goonies and rewatch it. It's a rainy day. Let's put the Goonies on. I probably would. If people wanted to watch it for nostalgic reasons, and the parts of the movie felt long to me. It's 2 hours or just over 2 hours, which at the 80s was a long movie. Some of it was drawn. I mean, the opening parts of it, it didn't need to be that long, I don't think, when they kind of find the treasure map. Like, I think that's one of the issues I had with it overall, is that part was quite long. I enjoyed all the aspects from when they got to the Fratelli brothers pretty much to the end of the movie, the action, all that sort of stuff. But that part was a little bit too long. So I think it was pretty fairly rated from that. I think what it did interestingly was that it, compared to Breakfast Club, Back to the Future, Rocky IV, Indiana Jones, what they were trying to go for was they were trying to hit a niche market of like a child's movie, an 80s child's movie. What they're aiming to get it, and you even mentioned this in the comments on Saturday night, this would have horrified me as a young kid, which is probably true. Like, Sloth was horrifying. The Fratelli family was pretty horrifying. Parts of what they did, like, the parts of it that would freak you out, but that was what the 80s was kind of like for, like, this is a kid's movie. But also, I know so many 80s, like my dad, my mom, so many 80s parents, of that era when they were around, the movies they were watching they loved the Goonies, but it wasn't like they were strictly only allowed to watch the Goonies. You know what I mean? Like, they were watching Back to the Future. They were watching Breakfast Club. They were watching Rocky IV. So I think in some ways, we'll get to maybe just a quick discussion on it as we're closing, but in some ways, if this movie, or the style of it being a movie, came out today in 2020 compared to back then, with the intense movies we have now that's supposed to be for adults only, would it hit a more niche market of kids, or that upper echelon of like young teenagers? I don't know. I don't know if it would. Do kids even do they care about that anymore? It's kind of like what Stranger Things has been on a TV series level is kind of like what the Goonies could have been if it was released now on that scale. So, that's kind of where I feel. But, I want to end the podcast kind of having a brief discussion with you, because it is your first time seeing it. Where do you think it ranks on all-time 80s movies? Where do you think it fits? Is there room for the Goonies in 2020? And would you show your future kids this movie?
All right, multiple parts to that question.
Really
Do I rate it like really highly in terms of 80s movies? No, I would much rather go and watch Indy or Rocky IV or Back to the Future or Return of the Jedi, or like, just in terms of cult classic movies that have influenced pop culture, I wouldn't rank it that highly. But it's constantly referenced, and this was the thing that I was really interested. Like, I love Stranger Things. I love 80s themed stuff, and it's constantly referenced as like inspirational for stuff like that. It's like modern release, but has an 80s vibe. So even like when the kids are like riding around on their bicycles to different places at the very start of the movie, I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, I see all of the Stranger Things kid team up parallels. And so whilst I don't think it's like top echelon of 80s movies, I think it's definitely, in terms of most influential, right up there with any time that you see like kind of a wacky gang brought together to go on a quest or to go on a mission or to defeat a baddie. And so in terms of like, would I show my kids it? Like, I'd say like 10, 11, 12 range. Sure. Like, I'm not showing my 6-year-old little Denzel Washington Van der Wielen, as we're going to name him. I'm not showing him Stranger Things, on his 6th birthday. I wouldn't show him the Goonies just because Sloth, I reckon, would creep him out. He's a rather sensitive soul, my future son, Denzel. And so, but around that age group, like 12, 13, if you wanted to watch a 1985 movie, but my thought is, okay, if I have a 12-year-old, are they going to enjoy this movie? Or are they just going to are they going to look at something like Hunger Games the way you and I are looking at the Goonies,
Yeah, look, that's one of the questions I always have. And I mean, this is why we're doing these type of podcasts, for discussing cinema and all that sort of stuff, is how far do these cult classic movies hold up? Like, how long into the future will they continue to be a cult classic? Because even for us, I can look at the Goonies or look at Breakfast Club, and like, Breakfast Club's an amazing movie, but I can look at them and go, wow, this is old. But man, it meant something. Man, it drove pop culture at that time. And I want to know how far, because I think in some ways there's an era coming where what things did for pop culture is not relevant to certain people anymore. Look, I love the Beatles, but there's certain teenagers that I know that would not appreciate the Beatles music or what they did for pop culture because it's gone that far out from where they're currently living. And so it'll be interesting to see with this movie, does it hold up the test of time when our kids are around and they're our age and they're watching movies? And maybe you're right. Maybe there are films like, maybe it is Hunger Games. Maybe it is Inception. Maybe it is Shutter Island. Maybe these are the films that they're going like, wow, there's issues with that movie. The camera looks weird. The graphics look weird. The special effects look weird, but it still holds up. And maybe Marvel is the only thing that people look back on and appreciate back when we're in 2040. I don't know. So we'll have to. But in saying that, we're seeing a revival of certain things, and because we're looking at Star Wars movies still being made, and so things of that era, people are still finding relevant because there's things that are referencing them. So I think as long as there's fans still alive of a movie when it came out, or people that have rewatched it and fallen in love with it, I think it'll live on. So, yeah, we got deep there. I wasn't expecting to get that deep with movie review, but there we are. So,
man, the relevance of history.
mm-hmm.
It's a deep topic.
Mm-hmm. And one day they'll be talking about this very podcast in history classes, in lessons, in film schools, in
Yep.
I believe it. I really do.
In 35 years, you and I will record a reunion YouTube special with Josh Gad from Frozen fame.
Mm-hmm.
We'll discuss the recording of this podcast, and we'll reprise some of our most precious dialogue.
I wouldn't mind doing a Frozen review. I mean, Disney Plus doesn't have the access yet to do as a Netflix party, but I would still. Oh, anyway, we'll get there. Frozen 2, brilliant film also. Shout out to Frozen 2, come on the pod. I don't know who that means, but everyone come on the pod. Anything you want to say to the people before we leave?
Please, if you have other thoughts about the Goonies, it's a bold new world for me. I feel like I've become immersed in Goonies nostalgia. And it's almost that weird phenomenon where you aren't nostalgic for it, but you feel like you should be nostalgic for it because you see people being nostalgic for it. So if you have Goonies thoughts or just general thoughts, flick me a message. Hit me up.
Appreciate that. I would have loved, I should have worn a Hawaiian shirt today, 4 chunks. That would have been the right, appropriate thing to do. So people watching, I'm sorry. I didn't wear a Hawaiian shirt. I apologize. I just want to say, keep it real. Thanks for listening. If you haven't watched the Goonies reunion on Josh Gad's YouTube, after you've listened to this, jump on. I'm not getting paid for this, but Josh Gad, you could pay me if you want to. That's fine.
Josh Gad, come on the pod.
Come on the pod, Josh Gad. I'll give a little bit to Chris, but not much to Chris. I'll take most of it because COVID. That's mainly the reason. But thanks, guys. Remember to set your booty traps. We love all of them. We love this movie. Thank you for coming on, Christopher. You're a legend. You're an all-time hero of the podcast. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for watching, and enjoy the night. See you next time.